Hello everyone, thank you for joining us this afternoon. First we want to let you know that the webinar is being recorded and we will be providing a link by email in the next day or two so that you can relive the joy that is this presentation. The presentation should run for about 45 to 50 minutes and we're going to shoot to leave some time at the end for Q&A. So with that, we're going to get started. First, a quick overview on Kraft Kennedy. Kraft Kennedy provides technology and management consulting services to corporations and professional service firms. The vast majority of our client base is law firms. We have been in business for about 26 years, focused on design, the implementation, support of IT systems, and most recently have added IT security. We focus on everything from the user to the data center. My name is Robert Kirtley. I am the practice leader here at Kraft Kennedy. I have been involved with Deloitte Consulting for 12 years, Duff & Phelps 10 years before this. My focus is on information governance, compliance, and IT security.
And hello, my name is Douglas Brush. I'm the practice director for the Information Security and Governance program here at Kraft Kennedy. I've been involved with IT professionally for about 20 years. I've owned a few different consulting firms focused on IT, and my core focus for about the past 7 to 8 years has been a focus on information security. So we kind of want to give you an overview of what this presentation is going to cover. And this is not a discussion of why you necessarily need a program. We're kind of assuming that you already have interest, awareness, or direction to develop a program. What we will discuss is the components of a security program and how to implement. At this point too, you should also already have some level of management stakeholder buy-in, so you should kind of overcome this hurdle at this point. But what we want again is to take a look at what steps to take, how to proceed, and as you go through this and start getting to be able to implement it, understand this is all not cookie cutter, that you will have to make this tailored for your environment and for your organization. And in 45 minutes, we want to give you a good top-down overview of some of the key points to work on so you can get things going. But you won't have everything you need started in 45 minutes. And this is important because it's important to realize as you develop an information security program, you need to have realistic goals now and as you move forward. And so our kind of professional perspective and what we look at as a firm and as a practice is that information security programs need to be viewed as an integrated organizational business process and address business needs. We view that the lifeblood of any business is a safe and reliable flow of information, but the processes and infrastructure to support these needs to be secured. But we want to also take a look a little bit on what is security and what some of the key elements are. So if you kind of take a look at the slide here, we have confidentiality, integrity, and availability, also called the CIA. It's not the agency, but the security that TRIAD is built around. And we don't want you to spend a lot of time here focusing too heavily on this. We're not going to prepare you for a CISP exam, but it's important that you kind of keep in mind some of these basics as you look at your program development, because these are kind of the foundations of what you want to secure within your environment.
In terms of the security refresher, so Doug talked a little bit about some of the things that go into your considerations. But in terms of refreshing you on what are the things you need to be thinking about, you need to understand the difference, the interplay between threats and vulnerabilities, the impact that they have. If you're getting stuck in developing your security program, you just need to think about what you're doing to address these concepts. So we're looking at threats, vulnerabilities, impacts, and most importantly, risk, and that's the intersection of threats and vulnerabilities. Doug?
Yeah, so know that in security, you really is only as truly strong as your weakest link. And it's kind of that weird inverse relationship between your efforts and an event becoming an incident. You have to strive to be on top of your game almost 100% of the time, but a threat only has to hit the mark once.
So think about the Maginot Line and the French thinking they have this extraordinary defense, or TSA talks about the fact that they have to be perfect and the terrorists only have to be right once.
Yeah. And again, we want you to focus on taking a risk management approach to security. So you really want to think of information security as a process of managing risks, whether it be from internal or external threats, and getting the risk down to an acceptable level. And going through your kind of risk management methods of avoidance, deterrence, mitigation, transference, and acceptance, think that a risk-based approach and mindset works well with communicating, particularly in law firms and with law firm management when you're implementing a program. And we can't stress this enough, is that security is never done. It's an ongoing process, and why you build a program so you can monitor and improve those processes. And there are a number of security frameworks that you can kind of build into your program. There's NIST frameworks, and what's being popular now within the legal community is the ISO 27001. But that specifies 114 controls and 14 groups, so that's a lot. And that cannot all be done at once, but those are good frameworks where you can take some concepts and use them as a guide. So that's our view of security, is that it's a risk management process. And I know it doesn't sound all too sexy. We all want to think that we are Neo wearing black sunglasses, doing Kung Fu in the Matrix. But in reality, fighting threats needs to be an organized process that is part of an ongoing program, and you incorporate feedback into the process to continue to reduce the risk. So it's all part of an ongoing cycle to identify areas where you're at risk, assess the impact and likelihood of an incident, develop a plan to mitigate the risks, implement actions, monitor the program, but keep it going. It's an iterative process. It's not just done.
Okay, so where do you start? Again, this is, as Doug mentioned, this is not a one-size-fits-all scenario. As a law firm, there are aspects of IT and security that are unique to our industry, and things that are unique specifically to your firm, your clients, and the clients that they serve. You need to start by addressing the needs of your organization and what's driving the specific security initiative. A lot of times it's driven by the fact that you've suffered a breach, or a close competitor that you work in the same industry with has suffered a breach. Could be business needs. You may be getting client requests. I'm sure a number of folks on the phone have gotten the RFIs already from their clients asking about their security posture. Maybe your firm is in the process of applying for cyber insurance. Or maybe you're just involved in this because you really love security. It does happen. The bottom line is that you need to make sure that there is a clear directive, a clear objective, and a clear goal. If you do not have this, you need to develop them. Again, we're assuming that if you're on this call, you've already been given direction to work on security, or you have an opportunity to address it. But what we want to focus on is helping you understand and define sort of what are the parameters you should be thinking about. How big are we? How many offices are we? Do we have international exposure, either from our own offices or from clients that we're serving? Are there specific regulations or compliance mandates that we have to deal with, like HIPAA or SEC? These things can really drive what you need to consider. Now, we realize that most of our firms that we're dealing with have some intersection with healthcare organizations. It could be doctors' offices, it could be hospitals, it could just be employee labor and employment sort of stuff. But the bottom line, even though you're not a healthcare organization, you're still covered by HIPAA if you serve these sorts of clients. We've seen a lot of HIPAA questions shaking the security bushes at law firms. One of the key takeaways, you don't have to read the whole paragraph, you can read it at your leisure, but one of the key takeaways is that the bottom line here, that you need to, that HIPAA requires that business associates of healthcare organizations comply with the rules requirements to protect the privacy and security of protected health information. Bottom line is, if you are a business associate, and law firms qualify, if you're a business associate, you are subject to HIPAA rules.
And a lot of this was expanded under High-Tech Act of 2009, where they wanted to see greater enforcement actions, and particularly the focus on business associates.
So as a business associate, you need to know and document what type of services you do on behalf of healthcare organizations. What are the types of data that you interact with? What are the touch points that you have with the data? Is it simply related to litigation? Are you doing M&A deals? Are you doing operational advisory for healthcare organizations where you come into contact with the data? Just because you do work for healthcare entities, however, it does not automatically mean that you're covered by HIPAA as a business associate. However, it does mean that you run the risk of exposure to this data, even if it's potentially not relevant to cases that you're dealing with. Bottom line is that if you are a business associate and you do work with healthcare organizations, you need to understand what PHI is, protected health information, and understand what your potential exposure is to this. This can get kind of deep into specific areas of data classification. That is way outside the scope of this presentation. HIPAA, high-tech rules can be an hour-long presentation in and of themselves. But as a security professional, it is your responsibility to understand what the HIPAA security rules are and what the privacy rules are with respect to health information.
And also, as you go through with addressing some of these types of needs around HIPAA and high-tech, do get the advice of outside counsel. There are a number of law firms that focus on HIPAA and healthcare and PHI privacy laws and security, that if you're writing a policy and a program that has to address that, make sure you're getting final sign-off on that. But certainly HIPAA is not the only one. There's also some newer initiatives from something like the SEC.
So in April of this year, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC Office of Compliance, Inspections and Examinations, OCIE, they issued a risk alert, which is the OCIE Cybersecurity Initiative. The initiative covers a series of pilot examinations of more than 50 broker-dealers and investment advisors. The reason this is relevant for law firms, again, is because law firms are advising these broker-dealers. Law firms are advising these investment advisors. You're doing deals with them. You're helping deal with all of their client contracts. You're helping deal with the structure of their investment tools. So the bottom line is that it covers things that are relevant and specific information that your law firms are dealing with if you are working with a broker-dealer, if you're working with investment advisors. There is a specific section for the examination around how data is handled by third parties for those broker-dealers and investment advisors. The SEC is asking the firms if, number one, if they perform cybersecurity risk assessments of their business partners, and number two, what sort of rules and structure does the third party have for cordoning off and protecting the firm network, customer data, or sensitive information. They want to know that the third parties that are dealing with information have information security programs, and if there are documented procedures that the firms are following in order to ensure the confidentiality of the data. Again, just like HIPAA, this can be fairly broad, and when it comes to you, if one of your clients asks about this, you need to be prepared with documentation to tell them how you are dealing with specific information security issues for this data. This gets us back to the point of the presentation that we're doing today in the first place, which is preparedness. This is what it's all about, talking about having a program in place so you can adequately respond to your client's request about your security posture, handle incidents, and overall work to reduce risk to a manageable level.
And yeah, so that then looking at some of the needs driving a push for a program and the regulatory aspects, you should be kind of getting your arms around this now. Okay, well, why are we doing this? The issues are, where do you start, and how do you start kind of laying the tracks? And there's a lot of different approaches to building a security program. For law firms, and if you start, kind of just starting out, we think it's good to break things up into some macro areas. The policy, which again is the why, people, the who, processes, how, and technology, the what, the tangible assets you're trying to manage. And again, if you look at some of those security frameworks, they will get into much greater detail, break things down more granularly. But in the short time we have today, we want to look at these areas in kind of more broad, digestible terms so you can get started. And these are not siloed areas. As you develop your program, it's critical that these areas interact. But let's start with the policy.
Okay, policy design considerations. First and foremost, you need to make a written information security policy. This is crucial. Even if the document is only a few pages at first, it is the document that sets the tone and creates the rules for information security in the organization. Remember to keep the document simple and understand who the initial pass is targeted at, which is the executive management of your firm. Use language that the attorneys are going to be comfortable with and that relates what they do to what you're trying to accomplish. The first step in this is reviewing the current policies, if they exist. Then the next step is figuring out what are the needs and requirements of the policy. Again, it could be client requirements, it could be regulations that you or clients are subject to, it could be a whole series of things. Maybe you've made commitments to clients around specific security steps that you will take. So compare your current policy and the goals of your future policy, identify the gaps. And the policy basics, again, the scope of the document needs to be based on the needs of your organization, again, stated in business language. It should include the business objectives of the security program, as well as laying out specific measurable goals and responsibilities. Who's responsible for what, and how are you certifying, how are you certain that you've achieved those goals? The document should also include a scope of what's covered from a systems perspective. This is going to be everything from applications, users, system infrastructure, and should also extend to include third parties that you use. So even though the law firm is considered a third party to their clients, the fact that you probably use a discovery shop, for example, that's hosting client data on relativity, means that you have third parties that you're dealing with and that you are responsible for ensuring that they have adequate security measures. Also, make sure you poll your partners. You understand the business well enough to understand what applicable regulations you are required to adhere to. Remember that this needs to be tailored to fit your organization. Consider including specific areas later on as part of the policy document. This can be things related to training, business continuity and disaster recovery, records and information management, data classification, and then specific sorts of controls. Doug's going to talk more about this later on technology, but policies should include things around passwords, encryption, and even physical security. Remember, you don't want people getting on-site access to things on your premises. Remember, this is the focus on creating policies that enable you to achieve the business objectives of the organization. With that, the deployment considerations are vital. The reason we're stressing the business objectives of the organization is that you need to get leadership buy-in. If you do not have top-level support, if management is not on board, then this is going to be one of those policies that people try to figure out how to work their way around. The only way you're going to get enforcement of the policy is to have specific and identifiable consequences for bad actions that happen. Now, you need to be realistic if you're new to introducing security policy. Don't try to boil the ocean. You need to identify the highest levels of risk. It could be reducing malware incidents. It could be something as simple as encrypting laptops. There are a whole series of things that might just be simple fixes that get at a high percentage of addressing your risks. But you need to prioritize those areas in your policy and update the policy over time. When those issues are acceptably under control, update the policy and go after other areas, again, laying out realistic time frames and objectives that are measurable. Be careful of too many cooks in the kitchen. Draft documents, if they're circulated to dozens of people, will end up dying in people's email boxes. You need to decide who's going to be involved with policy development versus who needs to be informed. Involved versus informed are very different things. Once documents are final or near final, you can disseminate to a broader audience. But the key thing is to make sure that you have a small enough group responsible for development policy that you can actually get things done. Another vital thing is ensuring that you have a regular schedule for updating the document. This is a living document. It could be once a year, it could be once a quarter. It can also be driven by changes in the environment. If you're making a technology change, going to the cloud with Amazon Web Services, or there's a specific regulatory change that impacts your client base, then you may need to, on an ad hoc basis, update the policy document. But again, don't try to get overly ambitious. Doug?
So now that we've looked at the policy, we'll look at the group of people. And people are the root cause, but also the solution to most of your problems in information security. People drive the needs, but they also cut the checks for program funds, and they're also responsible for bad deployment and doing things they shouldn't as users, like circumventing certain controls or clicking things on that they shouldn't. And as you approach the people, know who you need to get involved. And we kind of alluded that in the prior aspects of the policy of involved versus informed, but you need to make sure the right people are involved within your program as a whole. So whether that be the stakeholders and firm leadership, rainmakers, people that depend on the information to be reliable and secure so there's no loss of reputational harm to the clients. It could be your CIO or IT directors. External clients can be driving this as well, and you might have to poll them to know what requirements they have or are looking for, and that can help, again, drive some of the business values that we spoke of earlier. But getting your clients involved in enough of the visibility of what you're trying to do so you meet their needs is important. And certainly look, again, as we discussed with third parties, knowing how to address the security needs that they implement and how they align well with your program. So again, kind of starting with the firm leadership, you want to make this really top-down too. You should already have some directive or nodding heads that you need an information security program. However, this should just not be thrust upon you with no involvement from those in charge. It's not just management that needs to push this forward, though. Bringing in, again, those other areas of practice leaders and senior partners to make sure they all have a buy-in. And again, we spoke of this a little bit before, but making sure that the people that are involved have accountability and ownership for the programs or program areas. This will help make the program successful if there is that accountability. Simply telling people to do things or that they have to is not going to be enough. It's measurable outcomes and getting them involved in the process itself. And as you kind of move forward in that design and you start deploying your people, the people portion needs some attention and signing off on all these initiatives. So set a schedule to meet with the people and keep people at a frequency that keeps the ball moving. And that's part of the planning, is making sure that you don't overwhelm people with meetings, fill up their calendar, but you want to make sure that you are meeting with the key people at the right times. And one of the things that is really important as far as the people consideration, and as you deploy your program, is to do education and training. It should really be a part of your security program. People need to be part of the solution or they will be the problem. Educating the users and administrators, vendors, is one of the most effective ways to make this program successful. People are really the weak points in security, and you need to raise their awareness levels and train them on what and what not to do. You really want to communicate this to the people that as a firm you take information security seriously. If the people within the organization and even your outside vendors and clients see that the firm is making an effort with a formalized program, they are more likely to be deterred from being a kind of a bad net citizen and doing things they shouldn't with information. But don't just train people for the sake of training them, so you just clear a checkbox on a compliance form. Make it measurable. Test those who receive the training. Audit implemented security policies where people have influence, such as passwords, making sure that they actually follow the password training and policy considerations that you put forward, and measure the outcome of the behavior before and after training. And continue to compare these outcomes from training to training so you have the metrics on what's working and what's not, so you can make the changes. Your training program can be something you completely develop internally. It's just a matter of balancing the resources of time and money. But you can also use outside parties. The point is, make sure you are doing training with your people to make a successful program.
But you can spend a lot of time getting policy together. You can spend a lot of time on people. You can spend a lot of money on technology. The bottom line is that you need to develop processes for managing these specific things to make everything else you do effective. Process is about how you bridge people, policy, and technology to achieve your security goals. As Bruce Schneier, one of the leading security gurus, said in a blog post in 2000, security processes are not a replacement for products. Rather, they are a way of using security products effectively. They're a way to mitigate risks. The bottom line is that security management process are the things that are done or controlled by the security team and management. That's the folks on the phone. The things that you guys need to be documented, need to be measurable and auditable. You need to be able to balance ease of use for the users, compliance with the rules and requirements and policy, and of course the ever-present cost issue that is always a big factor in how law firms decide to manage security and other IT functions. Your task is to make sure that the security processes relate to the business processes. For example, what would happen if your document management system went down due to malware? And it went down this afternoon at 4 o'clock. And your managing partner had a filing due tomorrow, and they needed to pull the documents together. If you understand how the business processes of the firm work and how the key systems all work in coordination with each other to enable the attorneys to do their work, you can better design response processes to match the risk levels for the respective systems that are involved and enable your firm to continue to do business. You also need to make sure that the people responsible for those key systems have the ownership and the authority in the information security program to get things done. I know we keep saying it, but that means management approval. That means the tone at the top has to be one that supports information security. With respect to policy deployment considerations, you need to get this process portion of your plan deployed. That means using the 3 Ds, documentation, documentation, and documentation. Document not just what you do, but the outcomes you are hoping to achieve as well. When budget season comes around, which is right about now, you don't want to simply say, hey, things are going really well, and then try to ask for more money. It's much better to be in a position where you can demonstrate to the firm leadership the success of your program. You can show them that the risks have been mitigated as well as an achievement in improved performance. Specifically say things like, we reduced incidents by X%. We reduced the time to respond to these sorts of incidents by Y%. We achieved the savings of the organization of some dollar amount. Again, work from the aspect of supporting the business and achieving business objectives. One of the key business objectives is making sure that systems are up, information is available, and we've done it in an economical way. As you approach the implementation of security and start to deploy the processes, obviously pick the systems with the highest level of risk. Not necessarily those systems with the greatest technical weaknesses, but rather the systems that would cost the firm the most, impact the attorneys the most if they went down. Work on remediating those vulnerabilities. This may not be an easy or intuitive fix, For example, if your mobile user population is huge, make sure one of the things you consider at least is two-factor authentication. That may mean that you have to balance ease of use with risk and make a business case for implementing a process change with a technical tool such as two-factor authentication. The key is to understand how the processes, technology, and people all fit into your policy, but that the policy supports, the processes support the policy. Ensure that you have layered security controls that allow you to plan, prevent, detect, respond, and most importantly, learn from security incidents so that you can reduce the number, the frequency, and impact of incidents now in the future. Practice defense in depth. This brings us to incident response planning. This is one of the areas as a process that you need to focus on developing. Obviously, you hope for the best, but in this case, we're talking about planning for the worst. So in terms of incident response, you need to prepare, identify, contain, recover, and then what did you learn? Document what you learned. So this way, when things happen, if something bad does happen and there is an incident, you can escalate an event to an incident. You can remediate whatever happened, and the attorneys can get back to work. The worst thing that can happen is to continue ignoring alerts and then respond with your hair on fire to false positives. All the technology and people can be thrown at this, but if the folks are not trained, your processes are not tested, you can be certain that you're going to have problems. One of the other vital things here is to measure. Make sure that you have metrics here to show that you're getting better with an incident response as time goes on. Doug?
Yeah, the last note on that, again, it's also with processes is to update those regularly. Again, that your processes, like your policy documents, kind of a living organism, something that you have to learn from and improve on. So your processes need to be updated at a regular schedule. And if you look at some of the the last point that we have here is the areas of concern that focus on with technology. You want to really understand the key components, such as your hardware, your laptops, your desktops, servers, your network infrastructure, everything from your perimeter to your internal LAN segmentation, or if things are out in the cloud. But also understand your user profiles and populations, as well as your applications. Those areas and how they interact with each other really help you define where you have to move within the technology of your security program. And within that, it also allows you to set important baselines. With the baselines in place, you can at least compare and contrast and better detect anomalies down the road, or as you get systems back up from an incident, it allows you to say, well, here's how it was in the best case scenario, is it working again? But with the technology, as in the other aspects, you want to ensure that the architecture of your environment aligns with the policies and business needs of the firm. And we wish we can just buy something and solve problems. I can't tell you how many times we've been asked as security professionals, what can I buy to put in to solve this problem? And again, as we said before, security is never done. It's an ongoing process. And quite frankly, there's no silver bullet that can solve all of your security problems. You have to understand that when technology, when implemented with the correct procedures and trained staff, will be part of your solution. And there are many areas to cover, but where do you start? The SANS Institute, which is one of the leading information security research and training organizations, working with NIST and other organizations, government organizations, help develop what's called the 20 critical controls. And these are controls that are designed to prioritize the areas of concerns that have the biggest impact in a successful information security program. And really the top three are your inventory of your assets, inventory of your applications, and secure configuration of devices, computers, and servers. the real takeaway here is building knowledge about your environment. You have to get to know your environment. With this knowledge, you're able to structure things properly instead of just, again, trying to buy a silver bullet solution. Because if you don't know what basically how the traffic flows through the organization, you won't be able to implement the right technology solutions. And this also gets back to what I said in the previous slide about setting baselines for your systems. Set baselines for your network traffic and for your user behavior. This helps you know the impact when things don't seem right, or when you need to recover from an incident to determine that things are back to normal. Part of the technology that you can put in and you should consider for your program, and again, not a one-size-fits-all scenario, but there are some kind of key areas to look at as you design it. Using proper LAN segmentation. This helps keep the transversal of an advisory in your environment from moving from one computer to another, from one critical system or critical system area from another to another. Helps kind of quarantine them to certain areas and allows you to control and remediate faster. And with this too, one of the issues that we would see, and we've seen within law firms, is using proper DMZ segmentation of web applications and databases appropriately behind the right firewalls. You also want to implement good administration policies. Administrators can be a tricky bunch to deal with. You want to make sure they are managed and that the technology deployment around them works. And that's around good policy is for how they access the technology. And you want to make sure that from a technology management perspective that you have separation of duties and rotation of administrative duties. And also make sure here it's just one of those things that we see some too often that is used as an exploit is making sure your admins have separate user accounts for their daily activity as opposed to their administrative functions. And above all, get rid of the local administrative accounts if you can. There's ways to work around that. And again, that's making that case for your users and others within the organization of balancing the risk and rewards of putting that. And there's ways to make life easier without having to make people local admins on particular systems. Password rules are another good technology or key technology area that you want to work on. And don't just go for complex passwords. Those are hard to remember. Longer passwords are key, and again, we only have so much time here before I can demonstrate why, but longer passwords are quite frankly harder to crack than complex ones. So look at length, not just complexity, and implement a password change policy. We've seen the large database cracks on the web of people using company email addresses with probably common passwords. Having a rotation policy helps reduce some of the risk of those passwords that they get recovered and being used against users within your organization. Mobile devices are really emerging threats. We've seen these being targeted more for malware. So make sure your BYOD policies and your enterprise mobile policies manage all the risks versus the coolness factor of a lot of these devices. One thing that's not on the slide here, but to think about certainly is encryption. Encrypting your data at rest, in transit, and as part of your authentication. Encryption won't solve all your problems, but it can help reduce a lot of your exposure for lost devices, whether it be a mobile device, an iPad or phone, or even a laptop that's left in a car while somebody runs into Starbucks to get a coffee. It's a good and somewhat easier, I wouldn't say totally easy, but easy enough technology to implement that will really help reduce the risk for lost devices. And this, again, seems all kind of basic but needs to be enforced. To enforce these technical controls, you want to also use management controls such as audits. So looking back into saying, okay, if we're going to implement this technology, make sure you audit and again, measure and check that it's actually working. And the big goal here is that you really work within the 80-20 rule. The idea is that 80% of your problems come from 20% of your causes. So you focus on the low-hanging fruit, work on fixing those within your program, and don't move on within your program of fixing downstream issues until you get your basics under control. The smaller problems often take more resources to fix, but give you less of a return.
And this gets back to what we were talking about earlier on policy, which is if you're new to the information security program arena, then again, don't try to solve everything. Don't try to boil the ocean. Identify those sort of big hits that you can make, the small changes that get you the biggest bang for your buck, and then incrementally improve the program, enhance the program, grow the program over time once people are comfortable with the fact that you're going to be implementing and practicing good security programs.
And again, that's really what we look at within this program, is those key areas of policy, people, processes, and technology. So some of the things you should be asking yourself as you work within your program and get it going is, what is the business impact if I make these changes? What are the business risks if I don't make these changes? And would a reasonable person in my position have made the changes to the environment to prevent an incident or a series of incidents? And you're going to face resistance. You'll be told at time, no, it's too expensive. There's other priorities. But again, try to focus on the risk and business impact of changes. Always try to demonstrate the value of your program, the risk reduction, and return on investment.
Now, one of the things which is interesting, years ago, we've talked with a lot of clients about this. Years ago, the way to sell security was the old IBM adage of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And you'd have to come in with horror stories about what bad things that had happened. That isn't something that is as necessary today. People have read about Target, and they know the impact it's had. People have read and seen the breaches just continue to come through the headlines, even as early as this week, with the Russian breach and the billion-plus passwords and usernames. So it's more a matter of focusing on achieving business objectives, which again is what we talked about before.
Yeah, I mean, information security is still new to many firms, and you want to incorporate and move, well, you want to move away, as Robert said, you're moving away from a lot of that fear-driven, we must buy this because, everything will fall and burn around us. You need to start using more of the language of business for business people and showing them the risk reduction of your program. That's really a key to being successful within your program. And think of yourself more as a security manager and a business advisor within that capacity. There's the adage of the 3 letters. And what happened is, whether it's true or not, a new security manager is hired, and on his desk he finds 3 letters left by his predecessor labeled Security Incident 1, Security Incident 2, Security Incident 3, and a note that says, open each letter in order, once per failure. The new security manager has his first security incident, runs to his desk and opens the first letter. It reads, blame your predecessor. He gets everything back in order and lets management know, hey, wasn't my problem, somebody else's fault. A month later, another security incident. He opens a second letter. It reads, blame the equipment. Spends a week getting the systems back up and laments to management. It's the equipment. If we only had bought better equipment. 6 months go by without an incident, but then something really bad goes down. Security manager rushes to his desk, opens the third letter, and it reads, sit down and write 3 letters. So this is not the security manager you want to be. Plan and prepare for problems. Realize that in the modern environment, whether you be a small enterprise or a small business or a large enterprise, size is not the issue. It's a matter of if. It's not a matter of if. It's a matter of when you will have a security problem. So don't sit on your hands and do nothing.
And one of the things that, again, we want to emphasize, we're all IT professionals, but the language that we need to communicate with the end users, the firm management, is in business. We need to talk about return on investment. We need to talk about risk management. We need to talk about things that a lot of times we don't talk about in the IT framework. So in order to do the things you want to do, in order to do the things you need to do, in order to achieve your objectives, this is about framing the policy, the processes, even the technology and investments that we're going to make framing them in business language, not in technical language, that doesn't get you very far with attorneys.
So with that kind of wraps up our content slides.